He said it's no facts. Oh, that's great. Right?
Please for February challenge of the month talks. Be welcoming Laura Colombo. Thanks so much, Laura, for coming. Laura is a senior lecturer at the University of Exeter's Business School, and she's also program director for the Bachelor's in Business and Environment, which is an interdisciplinary program that roots sustainable business and environmental science and environmental justice. So a little bit more about this program at some point. Laura graduated in political science from the University of Milan. She holds a master's in social economics from the University of Bologna and a PhD in management studies from our university, Exeter. Her research interests are primarily around the scaling strategies of social and cooperative enterprises and alternative food networks. And she also seeks to understand how educational practice can be guided by social and ecological benefits. And her talk today is entitled Bridging the Divide, Integrating Ecology and Business for a Sustainable Future. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thank you so much, Camille, for the introduction. Thank you, Amrita, for organizing this, and you all for being here. I appreciate this is a very busy time of the year, so I really appreciate your time. And I must admit, I am both very excited and a little bit nervous about presenting this challenge today, because I've shared these ideas many times with business school colleagues, with students, and it's nice to see some of you are here today. But it's the first time really that I share this with a truly interdisciplinary audience. So with colleagues from both the business school and the natural sciences together in the same room. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what emerges from this conversation. And I would like to start with this worked earlier. That's right. Well done. That's perfect. Thank you. No, that's fine. Thank you very much. So I'd like to start with a very short activity, just a very simple 1-minute activity. And business and environment students will be very familiar with this, because this is what we do every year at the very beginning of our program. So in year 1, term 1, week 1. And I would like to invite everyone to close your eyes, if you feel comfortable with that, and imagine 3 circles. 1 circle represents the economy, 1 represents society, and 1 the natural environment. Now, can you visualize a way to bring these 3 circles together? So is there a picture in your mind that visualizes the relationship between economy, society, and the environment? How do they interact? So once you have this image in your mind, please open your eyes. And can you draw this relationship in the post-it note or one of the post-it notes that are circulating? You should have pens as well, which were going around. So if you imagine the economy, society, and the environment as 3 circles, how would you combine these circles to represent their interactions? And once you've done that, have a look around and see what others have drawn. And if you're online, feel free to perhaps enable your camera and to grab a piece of paper and a pen. What's the picture like for you? Yes?
Is it how we think they should, or how we perceive it?
How you think they should?
I do.
So yeah, have a look around, and perhaps if I could have a look, I'd be quite interested to see what you've done. Thank you. That's great. Brilliant. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. So it's quite interesting when I do this, in a business classroom. Most of the time, sometimes everyone gives the same answer, or most of the time, the answer I get looks like this. So this is a Venn diagram where environment, economy, and society partially overlap in the middle, but are largely separate. And no wonder this is the first thing that comes to mind to most business students, because this has become the mainstream approach, if you like, to sustainability. This is the visual representation of the triple bottom line, no? The idea that beyond, in accessing the success of a business, beyond its financial performance, we need to be aware of the social and environmental implication or impacts. You've all heard about, people, planet, and profit. But what's the assumption behind this visual representation? That in a way, these three dimensions are somewhat of equal importance or can be considered the same level or carrying the same weight. And that's why this has been associated with weak approaches to sustainability. So the idea that natural capital can be substituted to some extent with other forms of capital. And I think it's interesting that today we have completely different results in this activity, because most of you have drawn something that looks like this, which is the embedded approach to sustainability that says it very clearly, right? With no nature, there's no people, and with no people, there's no economy. And so this visual representation allows us to talk about limits, for example, or the carrying capacity of the earth, and like ecological economists would put it, or the planetary boundaries and the social foundations of business. And this is not something new, it's something that ecological economists have been put forward for many years. I'm thinking about Nicholas Georges-Boulogne, Kenneth Boulding, Herman Daly, or more recently, Molly Scott Cato, Kay Raworth. This is where donut economics fundamentally comes from. So economists, and particularly ecological economists, have long recognized that the economy cannot be considered in isolation from the social and environmental systems in which it is embedded. And it's interesting to note that etymologically, the words economy and ecology share the same root, because economy comes from the Greek words oikos and nomos, that's the management of the household, or more extensively, the management of the place we inhabit. Our planet. And whereas ecology, oikos, and logos is the knowledge of the household. So what happens when we manage something we know nothing about? Surprise, surprise, we set the house on fire. And this is exactly what's happening right now. Climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, ocean acidification. Don't need to tell you this, I study this much better than I do. So in the context of economics, there is a conversation that's been happening for many years. And here is a photo from the International Society for Ecological Economics website, which was taken soon after the institution was taken in 1990. And you can see here a few familiar faces. We have Herman Daly over there, Kenneth Boulding, Robert Costanza. There is Jean-Martin Sallier in the corner. Most of the famous ecological economists were men, still are to some extent. There are a few women, and there's one in particular that I would like to draw your attention on. She's hiding behind the first row of people, but very much in the center of the picture. She is Anne-Marie Janssen. And she did something that I think is very inspiring. In 1981, she organized a symposium in a small town near Stockholm in Sweden, titled Integrating Ecology and Economics. And that was, she invited around the same table ecologists, economists, environmental scientists, psychologists, people from a very diverse background to tackle issues of environmental degradation. And that was one of the very first foundational steps or institutional attempts to bring ecologists and economists together. And one of the, it started the transformative dialogue that then led to the foundation of a new research field, ecological economics. And I think it's interesting and perhaps a testament of how siloed we've become in our, not only in our universities, but within our schools as well. It's interesting how, while this dialogue between ecology and economists has flourished over the years, the same really can be said for other disciplines within the business school. So I believe that there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in a way to integrate ecology and business. And I'm talking about specifically ecology and organization and management studies, and even more specifically ecology and management education, which is the niche where I position my work. So some important steps obviously have been moved in recent years, particularly in this direction. I just wanted to mention here a few. In the context of management education, these are two very nice articles that I would recommend, Mark Edwards, Oliver Lash. But more broadly, in organization studies, Domenico Dentoni, Jonathan Pinks was here, Stephanie invited him a few weeks ago. So there is some work that's happening in the field of strategy. Tima Bansal is a very active person. If anyone is interested actually in this, she was invited to give a series of lectures this year at the University of Oxford. The first one happened a couple of weeks ago, but there's another couple coming up. So she talks about, how to develop a systems approach to strategy, more specifically. The ONE, so the Organization and Natural Environment Division at the Academy of Management, Lucrezia is sure is familiar with that, also has been operating in this space for many years. And the last thing I wanted to mention, the upcoming Critical Management Studies Conference this year will be in Manchester, and it's really focusing on this. So the title is Regenerative Critical Management Studies. And it's organized by a group of scholars in a network that is called SLOW. And SLOW is an acronym for Social Ecological Organization, Leadership and Work. So something is happening in this space, and this is very much the space where I position my work. So this is the challenge that I would like to contribute addressing, and the challenge that I would love to hear what you think about. So what can organization and management studies and management education in particular learn from ecology? And before I share some of my own work, I wanted to highlight some of the reasons why I believe this challenge is important, why it matters. So on the one hand, I would like to say that business must engage with ecology for its own survival, to learn about the functioning of social ecological systems, to learn about the impact that business has on natural systems, because without eco-literacy, business risks exacerbating the very challenges that ecologists seek to address. So ultimately putting at risk its own very survival. And I've come up with this metaphor, so you see whether you think it works. That doing business without considering the social ecological systems it depends on is like drilling a hole in the ship we're sailing in. At the same time, ecology must engage with business also for its own survival, because business as usual in particular has played a key role in creating the very challenges that you are tackling in your work. But business is so much more than just business as usual. There are plenty of alternative business models where profit maximization is not the aim, but that becomes a means to achieve social and environmental goals. So perhaps I would like to suggest that doing conservation work without challenging the foundational assumptions of business as usual is like bailing out water out of that sinking ship. So we must work together. If we care about contributing meaningful solutions to ecological collapse, we must look at the bigger picture and step outside of our own schools. So after this long introduction, apologies, I just wanted to make sure that I clarified a few points. I would like to briefly share some key ideas. So some of my work, and then open for some initial discussion. But I'm hoping really that today will be the beginning of a conversation that, if you're interested, please let me know. We will be able, hopefully, to continue. So I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and would like to share 3 learning points that, as a business scholar, I learned from humbly knocking at the door of the natural sciences, and particularly at the door of social ecological systems research. So my work is situated in the business school as part of the Sustainable Futures department. And just 1 minute, something about my background. As Camille mentioned, so I graduated at the University of Milan in political sciences. I then moved to Bologna for a master's in social economics. And before going back to academia, I worked a few years in the third sector. So I worked with cooperatives, social enterprises, environmental charities, NGOs, and I worked on projects about environmental justice, alternative food networks, and transformative learning. And then moved to the UK. So I'm originally Italian, but moved to the UK in 2016 to pursue a PhD in management, looking at the scaling strategies of social agricultural cooperatives. And then I joined the faculty at Exeter first, and then in Penryn since 2021 to lead a wonderful program that is called Business and Environment. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. So in the last few years, I started, one thing, sorry, the reason why that photo is there is I work 4 days a week for the university. I work part-time, but I'm also a member of a growers cooperative in Exeter, and that's my happy place in the UK. That's where I like to spend as much time as I can. So yeah, the last few years, I've started reading and trying to familiarize myself with social ecological systems research. And what I would like to do in the rest of this talk is to share some key takeaways, so some key learning points that I believe management and organization studies scholars can derive from the way ecological systems work. And as I mentioned earlier, specifically my work so far has been on management education. So on how we teach and what we teach in the business school. So the first learning point has to do with the importance of better understanding feedback loops in management education to help uncover and address systemic dysfunctions. Some of you will be familiar with these books. In management education, there's plenty of literature that demonstrates how the contemporary university can be quite an unhealthy place to be, and particularly the business school has been described as a place where a certain culture of competition, of greed, of self-interest originates from and is reinforced. So yeah, just a few titles here. Martin Parker Shut Down the Business School is a great reading. Peter Fleming, Dark Academia. It's quite a shocking but eye-opening account of what's wrong with our universities. At the moment, the most recent one, Shaping for Mediocrity, talks about what happened at the University of Leeds in 2021 when a group of political management scholars were targeted and made redundant. So in this context, in 2023, I published an essay in a journal called Academy of Management, Learning and Education, where I start by reflecting on the unintended dysfunctional consequences of management education, starting from the literature that I just very briefly mentioned. So there is previous research that demonstrates how contemporary management education, perhaps unintentionally, but it nourishes greed behavior. There's a very powerful paper by Wang and colleagues published in 2011 that demonstrates how economics education in business schools is consistently associated with a positive perception of greed and a positive attitude towards greedy actions. And then management education, again, unintentionally, but encourages an obsession with outputs, with key performance indicators, with metrics, with rankings. And this obsession, this instrumentality leads to severe consequences, for example, on students and staff mental health. Or there's another very interesting article that I would recommend. It's titled The Triumph of Nonsense in Management Studies, Dennis Torrish, that talks about, because we've become so obsessed with how much the volume of our publications, how much we have to publish that we've lost track of the quality of our work. And then management education through teaching capitalism uncritically exacerbates inequality. And what I think is particularly interesting for our conversation today, through upholding eco-illiteracy, management education aggravates the ecological collapse, which has contributed to create in the first place. And in fact, it's very rare to find in a business school curricula issues such as the planetary boundaries or environmental justice, or ecological thinking more in general. So business students don't learn about the natural environment. And what's worse, they very rarely learn about the impact that business has on biodiversity or on land systems, or the environment more in general. I have to say we are very much an exception here in Penryn. I mentioned business and environment. Students here take ecological economics. They even take biodiversity and conservation as a core module. They take biomimicry, environment, society, and business. So we are a bit of an exception. But in the essay, so after highlighting the dysfunctional consequences, I focus on the root cause for these challenges. So on the underlying assumptions that generate these dysfunctions. And suggested management education is based on 4 fundamental assumptions. So the first one is Thomas Hobbes' Homo homini lupus. This is the basis of the Homo economicus, the idea that by nature we are self-interested, we are like wolves to other humans. And it's interesting that I mentioned that I studied in Bologna, and Bologna is one of the very few places in Italy where they still teach an approach to economics, which is called civil economy, which used to be the mainstream approach to economics back in the 1700s, and it's now become very, I say, risk of extinction, really. But one of the leading scholars in civil economics was called Antonio Genovesi, and his assumption was that homo homini natura amicus est, which means that by nature we're friendly to other humans, or we can be friendly. Anyway, so the other assumption is that instrumental rationality is what guides our actions, so that we are motivated by getting something in return, so increasing our impact factor or earning more money or getting a first. And then that profit maximization and capital accumulation are normal or natural for business, and putting them at the center is the only way to run a successful business. So there is no alternative to business as usual. And finally, that it's possible to decouple economic growth and social and environmental degradation. So I then looked at the bigger picture, and I wrote this before learning anything about social ecological systems research, before even knowing it existed. So I tried to make sense of these dynamics through the conceptual lenses that were available to me at the time. And particularly, I used the concept from sociology, Robert Merton's idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy, that explains how dysfunctional assumptions generate dysfunctional consequences. And so these are some of the vicious cycles identified. And here is a question for you, really. After reading social ecological systems research, I went back to this and thought to myself, oh, are we talking about reinforcing feedback loops here? For example, assumptions of humans are self-interested result in teaching self-interest maximization, which encourages greedy behavior, which reinforces the assumption that we indeed are self-interested. This is what one and colleague article demonstrates. Or for example, assumptions that management is a mechanistic discipline result in ecological issues being excluded from the business curriculum, which results in management and management scholars being eco-illiterate, which result in sort of reinforcing the assumption that management is indeed a mechanistic discipline. Okay, so what happens if we change then the initial assumptions? Robert Merton suggested this is the only way to break self-fulfilling prophecies. For example, what if we assumed that management is a systemic discipline? Perhaps that would lead to integrating more interdisciplinarity in our curriculum, which means the students graduating will be more eco-literate, which reinforces the assumption that indeed management is a systemic discipline. Or, assumptions of humans as cooperative would result in expectations of reciprocity, which create cooperation, which reinforces the assumption that we can be cooperative. And I'm sure some of you have read Humankind by Rutger Bergman. It's another very good book that pulls together research from different disciplines, including the natural sciences, to try and demonstrate how humans can be cooperative and we are social animals. Okay, so I've just provided a very short summary of a long article, so apologies if I went a bit too quickly. But here is a link to the article in case anyone is interested in reading more about it. So here's the second learning point for me, which focuses on the fourth self-fulfilling prophecy, or the fourth vicious cycle. That we must stop consider business in isolation from its context and start appreciating that business depends upon social and ecological systems. And now this might sound obvious to those of you with an ecology background, but I can assure you that it is not necessarily the case in business schools. And this change in assumption is not just a theoretical exercise. It's something that has very practical implications, for example, on what we teach and how we teach. So in 2023, I had the privilege of joining the journal that I mentioned earlier as an associate editor. And together with other associate editors, we published an editorial a few months ago to try and develop, to call for more scholarship, to analyze both in theory and in practice what it might mean to develop a social ecological approach to management education. And we invite scholars to explore 5 areas of inquiry. So first we ask, teaching and learning for what? To what end? For what future? So is management education merely geared towards equipping students with the necessary knowledge and skills to succeed in a competitive job market? Or to what extent is it also concerned with serving broader social and ecological interests? And then we invite bringing different philosophical approaches into the classroom, and especially observing through the conceptual lenses of knowledge systems that are different from Western rationalism, because this can help us overcome the conceptual separation between human and nature and appreciate that we are part of nature and therefore that environment, society, and business are interdependent. We also invite strengthening interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity because this is essential for addressing complex challenges. And we then encourage critically examining our curricula. So traditionally, as I mentioned earlier, in business school students students learn that management is about achieving greater efficiency of performance, that business is about maximizing profits, that economics is about GDP growth. But to what extent do students learn about sufficiency or about social entrepreneurship or about well-being approaches to economics? So to what extent do they learn about the social foundations and the planetary boundaries of business? And finally, we encourage exploring different pedagogies. So to utilize different pedagogical tools, embodied education, outdoor learning, experiential learning. So ultimately, what we would like to do with this editorial is to create the opportunity for this conversation to happen in the journal. So to make this space for more scholarship to advance this approach. And here is a link to the article in case anyone is interested. So this is about developing a social ecological approach to management education in theory. What about in practice? And I wanted to share a couple of examples of what's happening on campus here, especially in the context of business and environment. And I'm not saying in any way that we are there already, that we have developed or embraced the social ecological approach, but I would like to hope that this is the direction we're moving towards. And as I said at the beginning, we are very much an exception. In Italian, we would say that we are mosca bianca. We are like a very strange, rare, atypical animal, if you like. So I mentioned that here our department is called Sustainable Futures. And I think there are some dynamics over here that are not to be taken for granted. Our offices in the business school are next door to marine biologists, to other ecologists, to law scholars. So we're all in the same building pretty much. We are next door to the ESI. And we have this program that's been running since 2021, Business and Environment. It's shared between geography and the business school, and it's built upon the three pillars of sustainable business, environmental science, and environmental justice. So I mentioned a few of the modules, a few modules that students take. Here are just some examples. This photo was taken a few weeks ago. You would recognize, or some of you will recognize, the outdoor learning teaching to lecture theatre on campus. So that was a session we had on business and biodiversity loss. So we had a guest lecture by Nicola Weber, who told us all about the impact that business has on biodiversity, the current state of biodiversity, which was quite a different session to have in the context of a business school. And it wasn't an easy one to have at the same time, right? You can't just sit and listen about the devastating state of our biodiversity and then walk on to the next lecture. So after the session, we went outside and took a deep breath, and we started by paying attention. So we closed our eyes and we listened to what we could hear, to what we could not hear, and why. And then we had a conversation. We talked about, Rachel Carson's iconic book, Silent Spring. We read a few pages of Rebirding by Benedict MacDonald together. So we tried to not just learn the facts and figures, but also try and experience as much as possible what that means in practice. The second photo was taken a couple of years ago when we went on a field trip to the Apricot Centre, which is a community interest company in Dartington, Devon, and it's a pioneer in regenerative agriculture. In a couple of weeks, we'll be going to community roots here in Cornwall. And it was incredible, not just to learn about how a different business model operates and is being successful, but also being able to experience very practically. For example, Marina, the co-founder, took us on a farm tour and then showed us different soils. So one was the soil that they found when they first started farming, and then the soil a few years later after applying regenerative agriculture techniques. And the students could not just learn about it, cognitively, but they could see that, they could touch it, they could smell it, and if they could see how much, how alive that was. And finally, the third photo was taken as part of a workshop organized by my colleague Ruth Charrington in partnership with an organization called Let's Study on biomimicry. And that was a workshop that happened again on the campus grounds to explore biomimicry principles. And we have Isaac here who's doing his dissertation on biomimicry now. So that was quite an inspiring session, I guess. Okay, so although there is a lot of work that I mentioned needs to happen, I'm hoping that there are some positive steps forward, that we are moving in the right direction. But for me, the question is, are we transforming management education? And this has been the question I've been battling with in the last few months and years. And this brings me to the third and final learning point for today. So I found that social ecological systems research can help management educators understand what transformation actually means. And I say this because transformation has become a bit of a buzzword in business school, not so much in Penryn perhaps, but other business schools have built their strategies around this concept of transformation, but they very rarely tell us more about what they mean by it. So I found that resilience scholars, for example, Carl Falk, Per Olsson, Michelle Lee Moore, they're all based at Stockholm Resilience Center in Sweden. They can help us understand what transformation is about from a social ecological systems approach. So one of the first things I've learned when engaging with that scholarship is that transformation fundamentally differs from adaptation, because adaptation is about stability, is about perpetuating the status quo or adjusting responses to remain in the same place. Whereas transformation, on the other hand, means creating fundamental systemic change. And I also learned, and please don't laugh, I know that this is primary school sort of notion, but this probably is a testament of how eco-illiterate we are in business schools. I didn't know about feedback loops being both reinforcing and balancing. This is something that I've recently learned. So not only is a neoliberal business school based upon assumption that shape behavior that reinforce the very assumption, so strengthening the status quo, this is what we discussed in relation to the first article I shared, but also neoliberal business school produces dysfunctional outcomes that call for systems reform. And these dysfunctions can either act as a call for transformative redefinition or provoke institutional responses that treat the symptoms without addressing the root cause. So keeping the status quo in equilibrium, so acting as an adaptive, as a balancing feedback. So I think the important question is, are we simply looking to adapt management education to the collapse of ecosystems, or are we looking to transform it? And there's no doubt that there's a growing focus in business schools of issues of sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals, the planetary boundaries, even in some cases, or responsible management education. And all of this is very important. These are very important steps forward. But I think that perhaps sometimes unintentionally, but these initiatives act like a vent valve in a pressure cooker. So they let off steam to keep the system stable. So they feed the balancing feedback loop. They act as adaptive measures. And so that's why it's essential to stay critical. How can we ensure that these efforts do not just maintain the status quo, but instead build momentum for transformation in business schools? And transformation is about questioning the very foundations of what we do. Another thing I've learned from social ecological systems research is that transformation can be unintended and can also be deliberate. So, for example, transformation is unintended when tipping points are crossed in the context of management education. This is what happened during COVID, for example, where very quickly we had to transform the way we taught and move to online learning. But transformation can also be deliberate, can be a choice when human agents initiate fundamental shifts, for example, in values and beliefs, or in rules and practices, or in power and resource distribution. And if we want to focus on deliberate transformation, then I think it's helpful to integrate two different theoretical lenses. So to integrate a social ecological systems lens with a social innovation lens. Because on the one hand, social ecological systems research can tell us more about, what transformation is about, the fundamentals, what it is, when it happens, why it happens. But social innovation research can help us focus on the how. So on transformation practical specificities, on the so-called transformation trajectories. And so I would like to suggest that perhaps this is something that ecology can learn from business, and particularly that social ecological systems research can learn from social innovation. So combining a social innovation and a social ecological systems lens, I think that at least 5 transformation trajectories or scaling strategies can be identified. And this is the last really concept that I would like to focus on today. And again, it's interesting that different literature talks about similar dynamics, but using different language. So social innovation would call them scaling strategies or scaling pathways, whereas social ecological systems research would call these transformation trajectories. I just wanted to give you, I won't go through all of this, but I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. So scaling deep is about transforming cultural roots. This is what Donella Meadows identifies as being one of the highest leverage points for intervention in the system. This is also something that a lot of authors in the context of social ecological systems research identify as a precondition for transformation. And an example of this in the context of management education is what we did at the very beginning of today's session. So an exercise that can help us reflect on and question and redefine our assumptions. An example of scaling up, and scaling up is about transforming policies and regulation. An example of that is what happened at the University of Barcelona in 2022, when following a dismissive speech on climate change by the president of the Madrid Autonomous Region, which at the time was Isabel Díaz Ayuso, students and staff occupied the university for 7 days until the institution effectively changed its policies and regulation. So it officially committed to tackle the climate emergency and introduced a new module, a new compulsory 5-credit module for all students on campus to better understand climate change. An example, final one, on about scaling with, and scaling with is about transforming relationship, nourishing collaboration and partnerships. This is what happened as part of a collective that I'm a member of, which is the MEND collective, which stands for Management Educators Navigating Degrowth. And we got together soon after our PhDs in supporting each other in bringing post-growth and degrowth issues into the business school in different institutions. And a couple of years ago, we were faced with this dilemma of scaling, because there were more people who wanted to join our network. And we decided, instead of growing the size of the network, instead of embracing the organizational growth, we decided to support catalysts or people interested in being involved in setting up their own network. So new nodes in the network, and then remaining connected. So every year we meet at the conference, we keep working together, but in a way that is more, it's more scaling with rather than organizational growth. Okay, so to conclude, that's a link to the article in case anyone is interested in learning more about it. And obviously something I didn't mention, but we obviously need a number of strategies to drive deliberate transformation, and they operate at different scales and need combining in different ways, in different contexts. But anyway, so here is a link to the article in case anyone is interested in reading more about it. And so concluding. So today's challenge is about bringing, bridging the divide between business and ecology. So bringing together ecologists and business scholars. And I've mentioned that ecological economics has been operating in this space for many years, and that within management and organizational studies, there is a growing interest in learning from the natural sciences, and that some steps have been moved in this direction. But I also think that many more need to follow. And I'm aware that I've barely scratched the surface with what I mentioned today. But I wanted to, share with you some very small learning points that I learned when, stepping out of the business school and engaging with social ecological systems research more in detail. So I would like to suggest that, so these are the three learning points. The understanding feedback loops helps management education identify and address systemic dysfunctions, that business is embedded in social ecological systems, and that understanding transformation in social ecological systems offers valuable insights into reimagining and transforming management education. At the same time, I would like to suggest that ecology perhaps can learn from business studies. The business is not just about profit maximization. So there are plenty of alternative business models that prioritize social and ecological, social and environmental impact, that they are regenerative and distributed by design, so that for-profit business models are not necessarily natural. And a question for me is, how can ecology engage more with alternative business models? I can see that ecology is being quoted quite a lot at the moment by business and business as usual. There's a lot of noise around sustainability reporting, sustainability consultancy, ecosystem service valuation. And I wonder whether perhaps we can be more ambitious than to reducing our engagement to valuation of ecosystem services. So instead of legitimizing business as usual, how can ecology engage more with alternative organizations and contribute questioning and redefining business as usual? And well, I would like to suggest that perhaps social innovation can help us do that. So anyway, there is part of me that is very interested in the practical transformation trajectories that can be mobilized by working together. And there is another part of me that is just purely curious about learning more about the projects you're working on and about what we can learn together. So here are some questions that I haven't got an answer for, but I thought I would like to share. And I would like to invite you, perhaps before welcoming any question, to just take 1 minute to think about, what are your own research questions? What are your own thoughts in general? What is it that you think we can work more together about? If you're in the room, please feel free to use the post-it notes. If you're online, feel free to write a comment in the chat. Also, if you'd like to continue this conversation, feel free to add your email address. What I would like to do is to perhaps collect a few of these ideas and then circulate them anonymously via email so that we can use this as a starting point for a conversation next time. That's it. So any question?
Thank you, Laura, for the brilliant talk. We have questions.
Okay, so this is the big question, which I don't expect a solid answer to. In the current environment where we have public sector officials, some of whom are embracing ecology plus economy, and some who are denying that there is a link, climate deniers, without naming any in particular, where do you see the role of national governments in terms of supporting this? Because you've got, business, you've got civil society, you've got the earth, and you've got governments. How do we balance that? What can we do?
It's difficult, isn't it? I agree, and it's quite scary really to see what's happening. Just yesterday, right? It was news from this morning, and this is something, Stefan, that you raised recently as well, right? How can we? Is it helpful to criticize what's happening when there's in a way there are big problems out there that are not necessarily bigger, but are also very relevant. And I recently read, it was a book about the Spanish Civil War, and it was talking about, how, fascism there in the end prevailed because the opposition was so busy to fighting each other. And I was thinking, can we draw some parallels here between, with what's happening with the current discussion with post-growth, degrowth, green growth, and Brian, I know that this is something you're involved with as well. So I haven't got an answer. I don't really know. But what do you think?
I feel like there's a bit of kind of polarization that's becoming more extreme. On one hand, we have people going the way that they're having trouble, I'm going to say it very diplomatically, facing science or a lack of desire to face science. And then you have other countries that seem to be embracing it and going, actually, no, this is valuable. We're going to keep doing this. So in some way that polarization is positive and hopefully it will help shift things. But I'm not exactly sure how to help those countries that are going in the opposite direction. That's going to exacerbate the harms.
Yeah, I mean, personally, this is just my personal view. I mean, I like to focus on what I feel I have some agency on. So something that I learned from actually engaging with, social ecological system scholarship is that we need to navigate the balance between structural barriers and individual agency, or well, individual and then social agency. So there are, of course, some important barriers. So think about the institutions we work for, or the market the institutions are, part of, and how is the bigger system organized. But so that's obviously something that we need to keep in mind. But at the same time, we all have a role to play, and there is some agency that we can mobilize. So perhaps the question is, what can we do to make sure that perhaps the research is happening on campus, we can bridge the divide not just between ecology and organization studies, but also with what's happening outside of the campus. This is something that I found quite strange when I moved to the UK, because in Italy, university is very much in the city. And I had, people, for example, after retirement, they would go back to university, but without necessarily enrolling to a degree, just joining a lecture every now and again. It was much more blurred, the boundary between, the community, local communities and what's happening in universities. And this is something I think is important to try and work on. But at the same time, and sorry, that's the last thing. Obviously, there's the civic university agenda, and there is conversations happening in this direction. But I think, whilst doing that is also important to stay critical and think about, how does that help us question and redefine, the assumptions and the way we've been working here, and what we've been discussing today.
Brenton, did you have a question?
I was going to ask, how different is your business environment degree to other business degrees?
I would like to think it's quite different. I'll give you just an example. When I joined, so I inherited, if you like, a degree which hadn't started but was written, and it was all about a specific approach to business and economics, which perhaps we could summarize with environmental economics. So thinking about the exercise we did at the beginning, that focuses very much on ecosystem service valuation, considers the environment as a missing market. So in a way, it sort of fills like a gap in the market, if you like. And what I tried, so one of the first things I tried to do when joining the program, I changed the word environment for ecology. So the students now take a module on ecological economics and not just environmental economics, which means that they learn about ecosystem service valuation, but that's not the only thing they learn about. They also, we try to bring a pluralist approach to economics as part of that module, particularly. But I think that gives you an idea. I mentioned that there was sustainability, the SDG, and this is something that is becoming more and more evident in business schools. When I was a student, there was nothing about that. But then it's about what are we talking about? What does sustainability mean, as much as what transformation means? So what is the agenda that this is supporting? And I would like to think that in business and environment, we have some students here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but perhaps later we can have a conversation. I would like to think that you are exposed to different approaches and to perhaps a stronger approach to sustainability. Most business degrees.
It's fascinating to see where your first cohorts end up after the degree.
Yeah, and it's a very flexible program as well. So they have a lot more optional modules than other programs. So that means that when they graduate, there isn't a blueprint for a business and environment student, but there's people working on very different projects. From green finance to regenerative agriculture to biomimicry. There's a lot of diversity there. And it's a small group, which, it comes with pros and cons, because on the one hand, it would be nice to have a bigger cohort, but on the other hand, with a bigger course, that we would never be able to do the kind of teaching and learning that we do as part of this. When I was teaching at Streatham, we had modules of 600 students, and we'd never be able to take them to the Apricot Centre or to, do the kind of activities that we do as part of the business environment.
Great. We have some questions online. Tiago, the first.
Hello, good afternoon. Sorry for not being in person. Thank you so much for your so interesting presentation, Laura. I would like to ask you I think it's a practical a question, but perhaps it's a $1 million one or £1 million. I'm not an ecologist nor a business academic, so a bit out of my area. But what are you feeling? So you were mentioning the like corporate sustainability, sustainability reporting at the end of your presentation, and I'm also this also reminded me of the work we have been doing, even with Livia, who's there, with the B Corps, and well, as a lawyer, as an environmental lawyer, I still feel that there's a lot to do in the areas of trying to link businesses to, as you're saying, more than the environment, to ecology. What do you think could be done? Or what are your feelings about what has been done, both by businesses and by governments? And what do you think the work of academics, well, ecologists and business, but perhaps people in law and other social sciences as well, what do you think can be done more in these areas to try to bring together the real businesses? Because sometimes businesses see, well, they believe, sometimes businesses believe that these are efforts that are beyond their capacity. And then we can also end in what is understood as greenwashing or something. What are your thoughts about that? Sorry, perhaps it's a bit broad, but I think it's also a bit practical, like to try to understand what we can change and how can we bring businesses and convince them and persuade them.
No, totally. Thank you, Tiago. It's nice to see you, and that's a very good question. Well, I think, and I'm very happy actually that you raised the importance of the law, and that business and environment has a very strong partnership with the law school as well. So we have a couple of modules, which one for sure is core, and possibly there will be more going forward. But I think it's something that there's a current conversation about the importance of legal structures for business. So, and I think that's one way to help navigate what we're talking about, what we mean by business when we talk about business, for example. So I mentioned the importance of moving beyond business as usual. I think legal structures can really help us do that. So I mentioned, we went to the Apricot Centre, which is a community interest company. What does that mean in practical terms? How is that different from another business form or a cooperative? That's a legal structure, but what are the practical differences? And I think this is something important for students to learn, both in the classroom and outside. So, and I think in terms of what we can do, again, I mean, these are questions that I haven't got. I haven't got the answers for necessarily, and that's why I'm interested in having a conversation about this. But I think that we all do in our work every day. We make decisions. For example, which kind of guest speakers we invite, where do we take students, what do we teach, or what we include, what we exclude from the curriculum. So these perhaps are micro actions, but perhaps if we then share this, more widely. I mentioned the MEND collective earlier. This is exactly what we try to do in trying to bring about, topics that were traditionally excluded from business education, degrowth, post-growth, into the business school, and see, what are the practical implications of exposing students to a more diverse, array of business models and business structures.
We're going to take one last question online from Lena.
Hi everyone. Hi Laura, thank you very much. Very inspiring presentation. I'm gonna start teaching also very soon on social entrepreneurship, so it was also very inspiring for my practice. And I was wondering about actually, measuring, not measuring impact, but maybe in a very qualitative way, but with the students that you've been working with. So I know it's also like a new program, but yes, do you have any plans for kind of a longitudinal approach to how it could influence, their career choice or their practices, even though they maybe don't choose to work, even if they choose to work for a big business in the end, or, like to follow kind of a business as usual approach, maybe, yeah, it would have an impact from inside the organization, I guess. So I was wondering about that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for joining us. It's good to see you. I think, it's something that I haven't done, but it's very much on my mind. I do want that, as marking, for example, the students' assignments, I get to read some really fantastic reflections. And we introduced a reflective element to the traditional essay. So they don't just tackle an essay question, which, by the way, is very broad. This year we have how do we secure a thriving future for humanity and the rest of the living world by using different theoretical lenses. So they answered that through post-growth, degrowth, green growth, environmental, ecological economics. Anyway, so yeah, I get to read a lot of that reflections, and as well as how going through the module and the program get them to reflect on perhaps what they want to do next, or how they see the world. And it would be nice to do something, as in like a research project on taking that more, think about the more in-depth approach. At the same time, though, I think a lot of this is like it's something that you can only see the impact of this really a few years down the line. So yeah, it would be interesting to perhaps have a think about it and see what might be helpful to do. And I know, Camille, that your work is about emergence, and I wondered whether perhaps learning more about insights from correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, you talk about how disease spread from different species, and so how can ideas like this can spread through different programs? That's why I think having this conversation might be interesting. But yeah, Lena, let's have a chat. Perhaps we can combine ideas and students' results and do some work together.
Thank you so much. It's already the end, but please join me in thanking Laura again for a brilliant talk.
Thank you.